The first time I met her, I thought she was the weakest person in the room. I remember watching her struggle with something most people could do without thinking, and I quietly wondered how someone like her managed to get through life. It took me months to realize I was the one who didn't understand strength. Before we begin, please support MindShift Stories by subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories with the world. When I started my new job, I thought I had a pretty clear picture of how people worked. It was a mid-sized office in Chicago. Nothing fancy, just rows of desks, fluorescent lights, and the quiet rhythm of people typing, talking on calls, and waiting for the weekend. I'd been hired as a project coordinator. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked structure. I liked solving problems, making decisions, staying ahead of things. I believed in being efficient. If someone needed help, I'd help. If something was broken, I'd fix it. If a situation got uncomfortable, I'd deal with it. At least that's what I thought strength looked like. On my second week there, our manager introduced someone new during the Monday morning meeting. Her name was Emily. She was small, soft-spoken, and when she stood up to say hello, her voice shook slightly. Not dramatically, just enough that you noticed. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said. "I'll be helping with client documentation." She smiled politely and sat down quickly like she didn't want attention on her for too long. At first, I didn't think much about it. Every workplace has quiet people. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing small things. Emily always double-checked everything. Emails, reports, simple forms. Sometimes she'd stare at her screen for a long time before sending something that should have taken 30 seconds. If someone asked her a question unexpectedly, she'd pause, like her brain needed extra time to process. Once, during a meeting, the manager asked her to explain a document she'd prepared. It was a simple explanation, but Emily froze, just for a moment. Her eyes shifted toward the table, she took a breath, then she started speaking, carefully choosing every word. The explanation was actually clear and detailed, but the silence before she spoke made the room slightly uncomfortable. I remember thinking, why is this so hard for her? It seemed unnecessary. Life moves fast, work moves fast. You can't hesitate every time someone asks you a question. At least that's what I believed. One afternoon, a small situation happened that stuck with me. I was finishing up a report when Emily walked over to my desk. She held a folder in her hands. "Hey, could you look at something for a second?" she asked. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Sure," I said. She handed me the document. It was a client summary we'd both worked on earlier that week. "I just wanted to make sure this part makes sense," she said. I skimmed it quickly. It was fine. Honestly, it was more detailed than it needed to be. "You're good. You're overthinking it." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do that sometimes." Then she gave a small smile and walked back to her desk. At the time, I thought I'd helped, but later that day, something happened that made me pause. Around 5:30 p.m., most people had already left. I stayed late sometimes to finish things without interruptions. As I walked past the break room, I noticed Emily sitting alone at the table. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't working. She was staring at the screen like her mind was somewhere else. I almost kept walking, but something about the way she looked made me stop. "You still here?" I asked. She looked up quickly, slightly surprised. "Oh, yeah, just finishing something." I glanced at the screen. It was the same document she'd shown me earlier. "You're still working on that?" I asked. She looked a little embarrassed. "I just wanted to make sure it was right." I laughed lightly. "Trust me, it's fine." She nodded, but she didn't close the laptop. That's when she said something that shifted the conversation. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." She hesitated for a moment. Then she said, "Do you ever worry that people think you're not capable?" The question caught me off guard. "Not really," I said honestly. She nodded like that confirmed something. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I worry about that a lot." For a second, I didn't know what to say, because from my perspective, she was capable. Her work was solid. but clearly she didn't see it that way. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention. Not in an obvious way, just observing. Emily worked harder than almost anyone in the office. She arrived early, she stayed late, she prepared for meetings more carefully than the rest of us. But she also carried this constant tension, like she was always bracing for something. One day, during a team lunch, someone made a joke about public speaking. A few people started sharing stories about embarrassing presentations. When it was Emily's turn, she laughed softly and said, "I actually avoid speaking whenever possible." Someone joked, "Must be nice." But Emily shook her head. Not really. There was a small pause at the table. Then she said something very calmly. "I have pretty bad anxiety." She said it the same way someone might say they get migraines. Just a fact. No drama. No explanation. The table went quiet for a moment before the conversation moved on. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Because suddenly, a lot of things made sense. The pauses, the overthinking, the tension. Things I'd interpreted as weakness were actually battles I couldn't see. A few weeks later, something happened that changed how I saw her completely. Our manager announced that someone needed to present a new client documentation process at the quarterly meeting. About 20 people would be there. Not a huge crowd, but big enough. The room went silent. No one volunteered. Public speaking wasn't exactly popular in our office. Then the manager said something unexpected. "Emily, since you built most of the documentation, would you be willing to walk everyone through it?" For a moment, I thought she might say no. Honestly, I expected her to. She looked down at the table, took a breath. Then she said, "Okay." Over the next week, I saw her preparing constantly. She practiced during lunch. She stayed late reviewing slides. Once I passed the conference room and I saw her standing alone, quietly rehearsing. Not loudly, just enough to hear her own words. The day of the presentation arrived. The room filled up slowly. People chatted casually while waiting for it to start. Emily sat near the front with her laptop. I could see the tension in her shoulders. Her hands were folded tightly together. When the meeting started, the manager introduced her. "Emily will walk us through the new documentation process." She stood up. For a brief moment, the room was silent. I could see her take a slow breath. Then she started speaking. Her voice wasn't perfectly smooth. It trembled slightly in the beginning, but she kept going, slide by slide, explanation by explanation. And something interesting happened as she spoke. She got better. Not louder, not more dramatic, just steadier. By the end, she answered questions clearly, even confidently. The presentation lasted maybe 12 minutes, but when it finished, people actually clapped. Not because it was amazing, but because it was solid, clear, useful. Emily smiled politely and sat down quickly. The meeting moved on, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just seen. Afterward, I caught up with her in the hallway. "That was really good," I said. She smiled a little relieved. "Thanks, I'm glad it's over." I laughed. "Were you nervous?" She looked at me like that was obvious. "Terrified," she said. "But you did it anyway." She shrugged lightly. "Yeah." Then she said something that stayed with me for days. "I've learned something about anxiety." "What's that?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "People think courage means not being afraid." Then she shook her head slightly. "But for some people, courage just means doing things while you're afraid." That sentence stayed in my mind for days, because it quietly challenged something I'd believed for a long time. I had always defined strength as confidence, decisiveness, control. But Emily showed me another version. Strength that looked like hesitation, but wasn't. Strength that showed up as preparation. Strength that existed quietly behind fear. The truth was, most of the things I did at work weren't actually hard for me.
presentations, decisions, speaking in meetings. They didn't scare me. So when I did them, it never felt like courage. For Emily, those same things required real bravery. And she did them anyway, every day. Months later, something strange happened. A new employee joined the team. During a meeting, he stumbled through an explanation and looked clearly uncomfortable. Afterward, he apologized to Emily for messing up. I overheard her say something simple. "You didn't mess up, you just felt nervous." Then she smiled and added, "That happens." The way she said it was calm, understanding, not judgmental at all. And in that moment, I realized something. The people who struggle with something often become the most patient teachers. Emily understood fear in a way most of us didn't, which meant she understood courage differently too. Looking back now, I realize how easy it is to misjudge people. We see hesitation and assume weakness. We see quietness and assume insecurity. We see anxiety and assume limitation. But sometimes we're only seeing the surface. What we don't see are the invisible decisions people make every day. The moments when someone chooses to speak even though their voice shakes. The moments when someone raises their hand even though their mind says don't. The moments when someone walks into a room that scares them and stays anyway. Those choices are invisible most of the time, but they are still strength. I used to believe strength looked like confidence. Now I'm not so sure. Sometimes strength is calm. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it looks like certainty. But sometimes it looks like someone quietly taking a breath before doing something that scares them. And if you only judge people by what looks easy, you might completely miss the strongest person in the room.